Hello, this is Timmy Vilgiate, and I will be playing the role of John in this episode of Rivers of the Mind. However, before the show begins, I'd like to make clear that this show is not meant to promote the illicit use of any drug, including LSD. The effects of LSD as portrayed in this series are greatly fictionalized and will not result in an everlasting trip. All events portrayed in this series are strictly fictional, and any resemblance to actual events is coincidental. With all of that said, here is the fourth episode of Rivers of the Mind, entitled Southern Hospitality. The farmer, Jerry, led me down the hallway, stuck in an uncomfortable lurch as his arthritic joints sent shoots of pain up the sides of his legs. He couldn't believe he was doing this. It seemed insane. But on the other hand, I seemed like a nice boy to him, and also a psychic. And plus, I'd spoken to the mushrooms in the field on his behalf in order to save him from an ancient curse. It was strange, but not unbelievable. He'd seen some crazy stuff in his time. He recalled a time that his best friend jumped an old pickup truck over Farmer Dale's house and landed in the hayloft of the barn. Another time, he'd left church and he'd seen an angel come from the sky and stop a car from hitting an old lady at a crosswalk. At the age of 32, he was sure he'd seen a flying saucer while he was out fishing with his buddies. He'd witnessed racial integration, men walking on the moon, and the advent of the internet. Heck, he'd been to a Grateful Dead concert once. The psychic voices and images and feelings he felt in his head, the existence of some kind of sentient fungus trying to insist he spend a lot more time with his cows, even if possibly the effects of dementia were just another oddity in a long series of strange things that had happened to him in his life. Jerry, I suppose, was the Christian thing to do, to give me a room. And beyond that, he needed to adhere to the basic principles of Southern hospitality. It was something he felt those God-forsaken California yuppies out in Austin would never understand. Hands trembling and aching, he gently turned the handle of the door to a room at the end of the hall, one with log cabin-style decor, a queen-sized bed that had been neatly made with a red Western-style blanket. "Home, sweet home," read a sign above the bed, and another across the room read, 9mm beats 911 every time. Pictures of his kids rested on either nightstand. An elegant wood chest sat underneath the window. Looking into Jerry's memories, I knew that every once in a while His kids would clean the room. He liked to keep it nice in case any of them wanted to stay there, he explained, but internally he felt like they were ungrateful for this. And he would have loved to see the look on his daughter-in-law's face when she saw me staying there. I set down my backpack.
Couple rules.
He looked off, not having thought yet of any rules.
You gotta keep her clean. And don't you do nothing you wouldn't do at your mama's house. You want to smoke? Take it outside. But I don't take too kindly to marijuana or anything like that. Bathrooms across the hall. Feel free to wash up,
He said, though I could tell he meant wash up as a command more than an offer.
I'm heading back to bed myself. I guess I'll make you some breakfast in the morning. And then I suppose it'd be best if you get on your way to wherever you're going.
He said, trying to communicate for me not to take his hospitality for granted and wondering if I could read his mind still. He wanted me to stay. He wasn't sure if I would. He felt like I wanted to, and I did, but also imagined that staying rooted in one place for too long out of the blue might be too sudden of an adjustment for me to make. Taking a shower felt unreal. The burning hot water, the steam rising up to my sinuses. I hadn't had one for 3 months. Back in Austin, I washed myself off in a river, and after that, I took advantage of a creek I'd come across somewhere just before I got to the hill country. By the time I was here, my skin was covered in dirt and dust and sweat. The water poured down over me and brought with it a flood of dense brown slime down the drain. The steam rose around me and filled my senses, a colorful swirl. Shutting my eyes, I felt myself standing on the edge of a chasm, one which stretched between the world I lived in and the world I remembered, the person I'd become and the person I'd been. My lungs filled with searing dense humidity as my psyche flooded with noise and palpitation, clogged like the gutters of my parents' house in the fall time. I'd taken a trip and I'd never come back. It was beginning to hit me. The awful force of this strange adventure. I'd almost begun to normalize it. My eyes shot open and darted around the shower, staring at the room around me, the flies trapped in the ceiling like the mildew growing on the edges of the curtain rod and the half-faded scenes of contrived marine life on the floor mat. I clutched my head, overwhelmed. It was all wrong. It was all wrong. The color white on the shower wall. It wasn't white. It wasn't white. Not like I remembered it. Not like I remembered it. The blues weren't the right blues. The reds weren't the right reds. Everything was off. But somehow I'd become normal. Somehow I'd almost begun to accept it. That was it. This wasn't normal. The breathing around me, the pressing against me like a blood pressure cufflet, the seasickness that I felt on dry land making me feel like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to stay on my feet forever. The untethered buoyancy of my ego over my subconscious, a riotous and cavernous calamity loomed beneath me like an open jaw, my own sensibilities and comprehension staring into that which lied beneath unknowingly and unthinkingly. If it weren't for the madness of it, I'd imagine I'd gone mad. But instead I felt like a totally sane bystander to my own insanity. Watching my mind and my body struggle as I remained deep inside, helpless, dispossessed of my own autonomy, at the mercy of it, inside of the great river in which I'd found myself floating earlier. I was only atoms in a stream, lost in a space inside of space, burning as a finite quantity caught for a mere second in the raging flow of infinity. I shook, almost convulsed as I came to my knees. The air around me was filled with a shrieking and uneven pounding against my ear. A scream rising from the depths of the cosmos, echoing across the canyons and mountains inside of my mind. I turned. It shifted. The sound shifted. The noises from the, oh, okay. I turned it again. The shower head. I shifted my feet backwards and I tightened it. Much better. The sound was gone. The sound. And so was the sound from before. The distant humming I heard over the ocean of dreams the last time I fell asleep. I was in the same ocean, falling asleep there. But the noise was much different. I pondered why. The mushrooms must have been making it, I supposed. They extended into this domain, wherever it was, and made their noise. Likely some kind of after effect of the field, which they project around the pasture to defend the cows. They'd called this place the Brick Abomination, I remembered, but I imagine perhaps their aura doesn't penetrate in here because the brick blocks them out. So it probably only seems like an abomination from the outside. Horrific because they've never been inside. They've never understood the inside of the Brick Abomination. They only ever understood that it was different. Different than a field where someone grows as a mushroom, or a blade of grass, or a branch of mesquite. And being different, and its qualities unknowable, they must assume it's the opposite of them in all respects. They are good, and hopefully the other's opposite. And so bad, that's the way it is. You know, why differ from the flow of the hive mind? They know all that they can know, the mushrooms, but they don't know what they can't. And so that's where I was. In the ocean. No humming. Barely anything. Only staring at the stars on the back of my eyelids, tripping my eyeballs out of my sockets until I finally fell asleep. You know, in order to really do what you're doing, sometimes I think you need to not know what it is you're doing. Take me for instance. I've no idea. Imagine for a moment that you're me. You took acid. It was your birthday 5 days ago, and you thought you deserved to, take some acid, and so you did it. And you were in Texas, and you were terrified you'd get arrested, and you wanted to see aliens, and so you did it. You took the acid, and you swore you just stared into the center of the universe, and you watched souls get sucked into the gates of hell, and then you come off of it, and it almost feels normal. Almost. But you're still tripping. And you're tripping, and you're tripping, and you're here in an old man's house, flying away from the sun inside of an infinite dream, until you wake up inside of the head of a girl you've never met before. She'd seen me once, and I knew I'd seen her twice. So I'm sure I'm lying when I say I never met her. But I'd only met her since I could read her mind, and I knew what she was thinking, so it doesn't count. She didn't know my name, just my face and the crystal that was now hanging from her rearview mirror. It was Megan. I'd seen her the day before, and I knew that I was dreaming, and so was she. Everything looked so normal. I swear it was the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. She passed by me on the street, and she asked if I could use any help or anything. So in the dream that she was having, I said yes, okay? But I didn't know I was saying yes, and she walked with me down to the Walmart where she worked. Well, their manager was there. He was wearing tissue boxes on his feet, and he had like horns growing out of his head, because I guess she sees them as like kind of I don't know, like Satan, I guess. And um uh um I found myself kind of playing the part in her dream ballet of some type of hero staring the villain down across a tile floor. I I didn't recognize myself while she dreamt about me. I was just a part of her dream. The strangest feeling, but I loved it. Because I wouldn't have been there if inertia wasn't doing its work. I must have been dreaming about her first, before I'd even seen her, when she was just a thought I'd had. I'd known her, and I wanted to dream of her. Aware of the strangeness of this new power I found possessing me. I felt it must have been wrong to use it to visit her in her sleep. But I'd never met someone so honest. And whose soul I could stare and trust without a word. But of course, I'd never had psychic powers before, but neither had she. And we were there. I was floating through her dreams. I could have floated forever, but our dreamscapes quickly drifted out of phase. I wandered intactably through the mines through which I'd flown earlier that day, unharmed and untouched by them, weaving through their memories and my own almost unconsciously until a crisp, warm light snuck through the skin of my eyelids, lighting up the trembling veins within them. The sound and smell of crackling meat floated from outside the door. Where was I? I felt so hot. I heard sizzling all around me. It hit me. I was in an oven. I was 157% sure, almost exactly. I jumped up, screaming. Something awful. Oh, I was melting. My body was being cooked. I must have been wrapped in something. I felt like something was on top of me, dragging me down. What in the... I threw the blankets off of me and dove for the floor, tearing off the nightclothes that Jerry had given me frantically.
You okay in there, son?
I was sure I was. I was just tripping, except that it was real. Oh no, it was all real. I realized. Except the oven. That wasn't real. Although, it's a nice way to describe a house in Texas with no air conditioning. Reluctantly putting on clothes. Clothes are stupid, one is prone to thinking when they have taken LSD. I slowly maneuvered out of the room, readjusting to being awake with a stiffness in my muscles, like when you've just stepped off a treadmill and you start walking. The light flooded in and seared my dilated pupils, giving the tint almost of an old sepia photograph, a comparison to which my imagination found itself immediately latched. Time drifted with the heaviness and force of a glacier. The old man's stern and stoic face, ringed with an angelic white halo of frayed-out hair, looked not unlike it was posed for a photograph. The antique kind that took hours to develop, which meant he couldn't smile. He looked up at me impassively.
I suppose you really are psychic. I was just about to wake you up.
He joked, between half to three-quarters serious. My face twitched, unsure if I should laugh or frown. Caught in the middle, I nodded and gulped, afraid to admit that I hadn't heard his thoughts. It was weird that he thought I did, though. Actually, I'd been woken up by the sun. I almost always am. I had to get used to the sun, tie my rhythms to it. I usually wake up before it rises, and then I walk until it's at the top of the sky, At which point I rest and I try to stay hydrated. When it starts to cool off, just around nighttime, I start moving again and I walk until I get tired. Hitch a ride if I can. Human brick and mortar fends the mushrooms, but it helped me sleep last night. That smells real good, I said, still hazy. How long had I been out? And how long had I been in here? This already felt like home. Like this routine had happened 1,000 times already. Even if I was still having trouble believing it was happening. The thought of staying in one place for a week already felt disarming, but I bit back against it. I knew that was what he was thinking, but I was embarrassed at readying myself for his invitation. I said, almost accidentally. My eyes grew wide with the embarrassment before I realized what I said was just as reasonable a thing to say for what he was doing for me at that exact moment as it was for what he was planning on doing after he showed me the cows later.
My son always brings me these eggs when he goes shopping, but he always forgets my doctor says I need to watch my cholesterol. Guess I gotta get rid of them somehow.
He scooped them up with his spatula and spread them on the little orange plate. Then the steaks.
I suppose you ain't some kind of vegetarian or something like that. Otherwise, you'd have told me 5 times over how I was going to hell for eating steak, pointing a shotgun at you, and voting for Trump.
He set the plate in front of me. On the edges, it said, Gavin. The old man looked at me tensely, trying to dismiss any of his own thoughts that he might be giving me that particular plate since it belonged to his son. The son that he hadn't called in years, and that he hadn't the slightest idea if he was still alive. Jerry supposed that part was his fault, though. Jerry sat down with a fresh peeled orange and a couple of pieces of steak on his plate, a clean and plain white one with a little chip in the side.
Well, I suppose I'll say grace,
he said, since he hadn't asked me if I was from California or Washington, D.C. yet to see if it'd offend me for him to ask me if I could lead the prayer.
Dear Father, who art in heaven.
I watched with awe as his words flew from his mouth in labyrinthine puzzles made of light and bubbled up towards the ceiling and passed through row upon row of clean, transparent squares, climbing into a radiant light above our heads. The ultimate. Again. I knelt my head in reverence and prayed along, adding on, towards the end, a muffled, yeah, which I sent up to the ultimate in a word that looked like a weird lopsided triangle. I didn't ever see what happened to it. For all I knew, I only saw it because I imagined it was probably real to begin with, and I probably saw nothing but light because that was as far as I felt like I could ever get, even if that was not for lack of trying. Jerry chuckled under his breath. Apparently, millennials talk to God like they did their grandpa when he asks if they're doing well in school. He took a bite of the steak, trying to keep it from flopping out of his mouth as he chewed laboriously slow. He'd been afraid of 2 things his entire life: death and having food fall out of his mouth. Now, he'd shaken the first of those. He often felt he faced death itself every time he opened up his web browser and glanced even for a moment about the latest headline about some Syrian kid blowing himself up in Europe or chopping some poor fella's head clean off. He still chewed with excruciating caution, though, out of the second fear, a fear that had only gotten worse with age. Nothing had fallen out of his mouth since he was 7 or 8, and his mom had boxed him on the back of the ear for dropping his corn dog on the boardwalk and watching it get carried off by a rat. 8 decades, 12 presidents, and God knows how many meals afterwards he was less terrified of the actual dreadful act itself than he was of going down at the expense of a near-century-long winning streak. As the meat made its way from his dentures down to his stomach, he pointed at a picture of the ranch hung across the room, bobbing his fork up and down like he was getting ready to say something. He was going to tell me about his daughter, Miranda. Miranda went to art school, much to her father's chagrin, and she'd become an artist. 38 years old now, and she was successful for it. I studied her painting, and I could feel the energy coming off of it. The traces of his soul resonating from each brushstroke on the canvas like 1,000 record needles running across a floor covered in shattered vinyl LPs. Illustrious and painstaking work. I knew 15 years ago when she painted it, she'd been crying. She wished that she could go back to her farm. She was so sad to know her dad was sitting there, waiting to hear about the test results that the family doctor had ordered for her mother, and that she'd finished it just as they knew the dreadful news that those results entailed. It was the part of the painting where the sky got just a little more blue. She hated New York, she kept thinking. The ranch was always on her mind, and so she hadn't needed any reference photos to paint this. It made her feel stupid, though, making this painting. She had her first gallery showing since art school in a week, and she was using the last of her art supplies, painting a picture that would never sell among the snobby rich people she imagined would be coming to see her and buy her work. But as an artist, she'd never connected with the trite postmodern collages she'd used to earn this showing, and had made only 4 or 5. She finished the painting the day after the show, having sold none of her 15 others. That night, she was drunker than she'd ever been in her life. She was ready to burn it in the dumpster before she, hungover and despondent, decided to mail it to her dad to get it out of her sight.
My daughter painted that,
He said, smiling faintly. Miranda hadn't come for Christmas in 2 years. She'd taken Gavin's side in what Jerry only remembered as that whole debacle. A debacle that he'd pushed almost entirely out of his memory. And Gavin didn't call either. He'd come out as gay to his dad. He'd had a partner for 7 years that his father never met. The rest of the family all knew. They were just afraid to tell him. Jerry didn't take it well, and they assumed it was because he was old-fashioned, but it was really because he felt like his son didn't trust him. He spent the rest of the summer not returning anyone but Mick's calls. Mick was the one who came out from San Antonio to help with the cows. In September, Jerry had called Gavin to vent his frustrations, and then that split the wedge even further. Miranda called, and she argued with him for hours. That was the last conversation they'd ever had. Now, only Mick, and from time to time Daniel, ever came to visit the farm. And Daniel never brought his wife, only his 3 kids. When it came down to it, Jerry didn't know how to apologize to them. Even though he wanted to, he wasn't even sure if he should.
She lives out in New York. Sells a lot of paintings.
He had kept and preserved every one of the flyers for Miranda's showings, keeping them in a photo album he'd maintained since her first 3rd grade art class. When she stopped sending them to him, he started printing them off online, writing in big letters so he could read them in a form of a brief executive summary.
Miranda leads Workshop in Estonia, Miranda's Show in Connecticut, Miranda's Show in Los Angeles.
As for Gavin, his dad had all of his stuff in a box. His report cards, the letters from the dean's list in business school, some old emails and photos the two had exchanged were also printed out in a big binder, also with big lettered captions.
Gavin gets his new job in Denver at the cannabis factory. Gavin meets the governor of Colorado. Gavin speaks at marijuana conference.
He'd stopped hanging them on the wall, though, when he'd found out the truth. But he still couldn't bear to part with them.
Yeah, she just had a show somewhere out in Spain. It was.
I acknowledged him blankly, slurping down a piece of scrambled egg that I had neatly impaled on my fork.
Well, you know, it sure looks like it's going to be a nice day outside.
Jerry bit down another piece of steak, and the two of us watched the other masticate with unease.
You know, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I guess it's kind of hard to have a conversation when you just read folks' minds.
I nodded. It was. I'm sorry about your kids. Inwardly, with a bit of surprise, he grimaced. But on the outside, his face remained still.
I'm proud of them.
I bit another piece of egg. It was weird to eat food. Especially when, if you think about it, you're eating a fried unborn fetus that your species just randomly decided you have the right to steal from its mother and devour at your leisure. My eyes went wide as I looked at the food on my plate. Suddenly, I could visualize its entire life cycle. All of it seemed to pulse with life as I contemplated the life it had left behind, and I thought of the cows outside and how unknowing they must be of the slaughterhouse, how powerless the mushrooms really are to defend them against real dangers, how naive they were to think they had done themselves a service maintaining the rancher's presence. How sad it was to be a chicken inside of a box, growing against hard steel walls and laying eggs for the tall, bald monkeys to consume. How horrible it was to feel it all, to realize I could feel it all. How the cows and their fungal guardians ought to have begged me to kill the farmer, to kill Jerry, to kill... I looked him in the eyes. With mild stability, he munched down on a piece of steak. He had killed them. He had killed the cows. In the scope of everything, he was a carnivore. In the scope of consciousness, perhaps it would be better if I shut my eyes and I ate the eggs, although they tasted like cold metal and death. The taste and the thought of the chicken suffering made me imagine myself as a chicken in a factory farm, in vivid and gruesome detail. Internally, I tried to right the course, feeling my soul teeter into a darkness and anger as my own sense of compassion pulled me back towards the light. I could feel the love Jerry felt for those cows last night. He loved them. He was grateful for them. He cared for them. He nurtured them. Every day he opened his freezer and took out the steak. Every day that he did that, it had been a creature that he'd cared for. He'd remembered it. He remembered it. And one day, he hoped to give his body back to them. He wanted to be buried in their field. Dust to dust, he supposed it was the order of things, just as the grass supposed it was the order of the cows to eat them. Soon he would. Soon he would. He would give back to them. But not through me. Genuinely, the cows loved him. The mushrooms, in their odd and haughty way loved him. I loved him. I love you, I said, finding myself staring at the plate. Jerry had started eating his orange slice by slice. He liked to bite them in thirds, biting first the top end, then spinning around and biting the other, taking out the seeds with his fingernails before he swallowed the middle part. Jerry looked puzzled. My eyes moved up to him, slowly and cautiously. I stopped myself from saying it, making eye contact with him. I had gotten carried away. The cows were only slaughtered when they got so old that Jerry could bear to see them suffer no longer. And meanwhile, the eggs were from his neighbor Jill, who lived over the hill from here and who Jerry thought looked mighty fine for a lady in her 60s.
You must have not had steak for a while, huh?
Jerry laughed. It was something he'd also said to his wife every once in a while. In a particular scenario I wish I never saw coming through someone's memories. Never again. I shook my head and withdrew from his thoughts. No, I love you. I poked a bit of steak and stared at it. Steak, I love you, I said, eating it stoically, suddenly tense from how awkward the moment had become. So, do you have any questions? I asked him. I figured it would be easier if I let him know that he could ask me the questions he'd been thinking of.
You ain't from California or anywhere like that?
He wanted to ask. I winced in anticipation, having prepared a lie.
Where are you from?
He asked me instead, softening the question. I said. Understanding that I was reading his mind, he tried another approach.
What do you want to tell me, how about? And I can ask you again when we go out and tend to the cows, okay?
Well, my name is John, and I can read your mind because I took acid next to a place where the government punched a hole in the universe. But I don't do a lot of drugs. I only every so often. I mean, I don't drink, at least. Never heroin, like you were thinking, or anything bad. Right now, I'm hitchhiking to a music festival in New Mexico. That starts in a month, and I'm going there so I can sell some healing crystals, like the one I gave you that you were keeping on your nightstand. I know about that. And I used to be I used to be a geologist at an oil field, but I quit. My favorite color is the sun, and I like looking at my feet when it rains. I didn't want to tell him that, but for some reason I'd had a profound need to say it. I'm homeless. I'm homeless on purpose, though. My old company thinks I'm dead, and last Christmas I called my mom from a payphone and told her I was fine. She was mad I wasted my education, and my dad's a disappointment. He nodded slowly.
Guess that's the sort of thing the government does these days, punches holes in the universe, god damn it.
He bit another piece of steak and stared at me solemnly as he did, wondering about my family. Figuring that I was from North Dakota, he imagined they were fine, respectable, red-blooded Americans, and he tried to picture himself in their shoes. Well, you know, my family's good. They're all good people. I want to visit them. I'm going to call my mom for her birthday. It's in April. I call my dad too. His is in May. I have 3 sisters and a pet cat named Rufus, unless Rufus is dead, which is possible since he had feline AIDS and a weird bladder condition. It's weird being here. Usually, I'm a normal person, but I guess I'm not now. I'm going to get some juice. Don't tell me where it is, I know. I stood up as I inched towards the cupboard to fetch a cup. I wanted to be careful to use his least favorite mug, one that had a pair of little rabbit children who always gave him the heebie-jeebies. But I gave up on excavating it from behind the other mugs after I had already taken 6 or 7 out and set them top down on the counter. I settled on a neutral-looking one with a picture of a windmill. You could tell it was painted by a machine, since when I looked at the image, it didn't have a soul. No soul at all. I watched the windmill in stupefaction. How could a painting have so little soul?
That LSD's sure a hell of a drug, huh?
He sighed. He vaguely remembered hearing stories of teenagers burning their eyes out on LSD by staring at the sun or thinking they could fly and jumping off of buildings. Heroin was one thing. If the kids were doing LSD now, that was something even worse. Who knows what could be next? They'd even legalized marijuana in some places. He'd heard of it doing strange things, but never giving someone psychic powers. He mulled it over and supposed it was the devil's work. I'd probably sold my soul to the devil, even if it was without knowing it. He hoped he could help me. I poured orange juice into the mug and slowly until... Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it, it was a mug. What was I thinking? People don't drink orange juice out of mugs. They drink it out of cups. They drink it out of cups! I threw the orange juice down, almost tearing my hair out of frustration. I'm so stupid! I thought this was a glass, but it's a mug.
That's what Satan'll do to you.
The old man supposed.
Pretty sad. Seems like a nice kid.
Jerry finished his orange, licking his fingers as he pondered whether or not he'd allowed me to curse his home with demons by welcoming me in. And I felt horrified. What if he was right? What if there was something dark inside of me? What if this was... I'll calm myself down. My hands were shaking. I was losing control. It was all this human interaction. This strange house. I couldn't smoke weed around most of my friends, let alone trip on acid with a total stranger. I tried to strain myself to use these powers to somehow act normal, but it was forced. I couldn't do it. I breathed deeply, and I thought about the most normal person I'd ever met. Her name was Janet. I tried to become Janet. It worked before I realized that Janet had never spent 10 minutes wondering what it was like to be 6 fluid ounces of orange juice in a mug. She was a sociology major I fell in love with in college and once made out with in the back of a pickup truck. I looked over my shoulder to watch Jerry floss and took another sip without looking. It tasted strangely sweet and tangy. It was delicious. I looked down at it and realized it was because up until now I had been preoccupied with the fact that it was in a mug that I hadn't noticed how good the orange juice was. Through a colossal force of psychic willpower, I put this thought behind me and made the orange juice taste the same way as it did before. Oh, this orange juice is so normal, I imagined Janet saying.
I don't suppose you play guitar?
Jerry asked. He was asking me since he thought I'd sold my soul to the devil, and obviously that's the first question any person in their right mind would ask to someone who'd done such a thing. A little bit, I said. I played a long time ago, I tried to explain. I knew about 4 or 5 songs. Jerry, as I discovered, knew a lot of songs. He'd been playing the mandolin for 79 years, and when he watched me strum a few chords on his old guitar, he decided that I'd gotten a raw deal out of my satanic bargain. I played G, C, and D for about 15 minutes. Enough for most country, Jerry said, before Jerry taught me some other chords. If you're a musician, I imagine psychedelics would probably help you be really creative. But I'm not Jimi Hendrix, and for me, my acid trip had left my sense of rhythm confused and uncoordinated. Jerry was annoyed at first, but later grew to like it, as teaching me the guitar was almost like having Gavin back again. We played and sang an old Neil Young song, to which the mushrooms and cows responded in the pasture with joy. For a few hours after that, Jerry walked me around the field, introducing me to his cows, including, apparently, 2 cows named Sheila and 4 cows named T-Bone. After I met 53, of his 27 cows, I suggested to Jerry that we head inside. Well, there you have it, folks. That was Southern Hospitality, an episode written by me, Timmy Vilgiate, with some help from Sophie Doss. Specifically, I would read her the story all the time, every day, and she would listen to it. In this one, she actually recommended some pretty good revisions that, or just even rewordings, specific rewordings that did a lot of good. The episode was performed by me, pretty much entirely me, except for the music. The music was done with Kyla Valenti singing, and then I was playing mandolin and guitar. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please be sure to tune in next week. Subscribe to the podcast. Spread the word to your friends, all of your social media followers. And yeah, please enjoy this last bit of music, a traditional song called A Beautiful Life from a bluegrass standards book.